we'll just go right ahead and bring in our panel of analysts and guests here today to take us through our focus in this first instance here today, the 2023 Democracy Day. And we've got Dr. Yunus Otanko, Chief Spokesperson, Labour Party Presidential Campaign Council, right here. And sitting beside him is Ali, member, Presidential Transition Committee for the Presidential Committee. Good gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Well, we have two other gentlemen. Professor Khalifa Dikwa is a professor of social linguistics and international relations. He is Dean Borno Concerned Elders, Shatima Emeritus of Dikwa and Kanuris in diaspora. He joins us from our studios in Maiduguri. We'll also have Chief Ayo Badokun, chieftain of NADECO, that's the National Democratic Coalition, who will also be joining us virtually. So we'll go to them in good time. But gentlemen, good to see you both today.
Thank you. It's good to be here, away from sunrise. It's different.
What does that mean, away from sunrise?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, somebody wants sunset now, doesn't it? Okay, we hear you, no problem. We're all here together anyway, so whichever way. But gentlemen, I mean, today, a unique day in the history of this country. So voting, elections, all things in that regard features at this point in time when people exercise their democratic rights. And so, I mean, if you cast your mind back to June 12, 1993, that scenario was completely different from what we do have today. I mean, at that time, even if you go through the visuals, the tapes, the materials, you see it on TV, you see how people, the passion was just there. It didn't matter who anybody was. The only thing was people were so excited just to go out there and vote. You could queue behind your enemy or your landlord. Nobody cared. And they were even teasing themselves as though you're watching a football match. We saw the proper spirit of sportsmanship, you know, as we wish we could see it in football with the finals of UEFA Champions League. But gentlemen, I mean, comparing that time and now, we know there are two different eras and scenarios right there. Dr. Tanko, let me start with you. Yeah. So, looking through, taking yourself back in time and then now, how does that make you feel?
You can see me smiling. It takes a lot of historical nostalgia out of me. Behind you, the nostalgia that you mentioned, I think I could do almost up to 100%. But I wouldn't mention it because everybody would have just picked it up already. Yeah. But going memory lane, in that year, we were, of course, we've come of age, so we were able to know exactly who we wanted. We are in Indiaraba. It's a Hausa-dominated area. The Hausa-dominated areas, this issue of tribal and religion was almost playing out. But the younger generation, as at that time, decided, because we had Tofa, remember, and we have MKO Abiola, who we saw as a giver, who was already a building block within the Nigerian people and the youth, in defense of his religion and his tribe. So all the youth in Idiaraba, who are Hausa-dominated, decided that we are going to vote for MKO Abiola. That was where I started my struggle. So it was an option A4. It was so beautiful. So, and our fathers, they're like, what's wrong with these boys? They were supposed to queue behind Tufa for crying out loud. Why are you? So they saw us en masse, like it was like a wind. We just queued behind MKO Abiola. And then when they were counting, it was almost in hundreds. It was like, everyone was saying, come back and no, sir, this is where we are standing. And we stood and we voted for MKO Abiola. All of us. It was devoid of whether you are Yoruba, Hausa, or anybody. We were queuing behind MKO Abiola because we believed that MKO was going to give us that kind of, it was kind of repatriate all of those things that have been taken away from our country and bring it back home. We were excited. And so the whole place was agog with the result. Remember, also Tofa also lost in his front of his own polling unit in Kano. That's to tell you the level of which democracy was at its peak in that particular period of time. And then, today I read something on the newspaper. Of course, it was accredited to the president that saying that sore losers will not be celebrated, if I can remember, if I'm getting the caption on this day. And I said, all of this thing about democracy, all of these people that you saw behind fought for democracy, and today they are being celebrated. For us in the Labour Party and the obedient movement, we are fighting for democracy right now. And we know, we believe that tomorrow will be celebrated. Because we are fighting for what is just and what is right and the due process. And so, democracy is something that people need to fight for when you are fighting for the right things to be done at the right time. And so today, as we celebrate these particular heroes, some of us who have been agitating for June 12 to be pronounced and all, it has been pronounced now. It was a long struggle. I know champions, we've been here together and all. By now, we should have been in Lagos. If it has not been pronounced, we will have been on the streets. But today, we are no more on the streets. We are only celebrating and enjoying ourselves. That the democracy and the people that lost their lives, a lot of our comrades lost their life in this struggle. They are now will be smiling. And yes, we've already achieved it. Let's achieve better things again. Democracy is one of the best, beautiful kinds of leadership that I believe strongly in. Because somebody who is nobody will become somebody.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very important to state that, the pictures you see here are just representative of the people who, struggled to actualize democracy in our country.
Sure. I can see my mentor, Ganifawa, you mean? Yes. I did not see Balada Musa anyway, but I see Umar.
Yeah, the list is certainly longer than, what we're seeing here. I mean, even the fact that Kudirat, Abiola, Alfred Rwani, who were mentioned in the president's speech, are not here, immediately tells us that, the list is not exactly complete. It's just a representative number of people we put on there. But let me come to you, Mr. Ali. I mean, it's Democracy Day. As he said, it's been a long struggle for us to get here, to get this day named, Democracy Day, June 12, and what it represents. For you, do you think that, given the sort of elections that we've just had, the rancorous nature, which the president, of course, acknowledged in his speech, would you say that we've truly carried on the spirit of democracy as exemplified by June 12 for us to be able to celebrate in a manner that's befitting today?
Well, I think we have, in a way, managed to keep the spirit of June 12 alive and also further deepen the culture of democracy. When people talk about June 12, a lot of people, especially, I think, Chamberlain fleetingly made reference to, I think, the Gen Z. Most of them were not there. Even millennials were not there when it happened. 30 years ago, how Nigerians came together to disregard the usual sentiments, the usual suspects underlying our underbelly as a nation, and voted a ticket that today is being celebrated, that has been reenacted again, the same fate ticket. 30 years ago, Nigeria wasn't certainly as rancorous as it is now, as the nation is now. 30 years ago, for example, the social media wasn't in the mix. And then 30 years ago, it was an unwilling military junta that conducted the election that has lost legitimacy. And Nigerians were anxious to see the end of military rule. And in came Abiola. And Abiola, Kingibe ticket certainly was a mismatch with the Tofa,
Abiola?
With the Tofa and the other gentleman that ran along with Tofa, Charles Ugo.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember. Because 30 years ago, incidentally, I was in the media already, heading the news desk. I remember very well in my state-run paper in Kano. And incidentally, the ticket of Abiola Kingibe was mismatched with that of little-known Tofa with Ugo. And when they ran, it was clear that they were going to coast to victory against the permutation of the military junta at the time. Because the military junta at the time had experimented with the cancellation of the primaries that saw two of the, at that time in 1992, who you could say they were political colossus in their own right. Ademuchi Roma was coasting to victory along with Umar Shinkafi on the NRC ticket, the defunct National Republican Convention. And the SDP ticket had Shehu Musa Iradua, a clear winner. And then the military junta at the time, people say that it was unwilling to go. And went into, well, like magicians, they go into their hat, pull out a rabbit of cancellation of the primaries. And that's how suddenly Abiola, who, God rest his soul, who had connected with significant number of Nigerians across the divides. Abiola, and that's why Abiola, giving his massive appeal, Abiola identified with a lot of Nigerians, irrespective of ethnicity or religion. And he connected with a lot of people across the Niger, all over. He was a national figure. He related to everyone, answering every call, attending to every ceremony, so long he's invited. So he was a mismatch to the late Tofa. Tofa coming from Kano, and that's why he lost even his word.
So yes, indeed, that's part of history. Yes, but I'm asking, you know, how we've kept up that spirit till today, especially coming on the back of the elections which we've had. If you say yes, we've kept the spirit, the question will be how?
Yeah, we kept the spirit. First, let's look at the ticket that brought in Abiola. My goodness.
President Tinubu?
Tinubu and Kashim Shettima. Same fate ticket. And people identify with that because they know way back 30 years ago, the struggle is to have democracy. No matter how some people say flawed the elections were, not this one in February 2015, the struggle to see that people are given the right to choose their leaders over time, as opposed to when someone will sit and then impose candidate. We've seen that happen. There was an instance in 2007. People were not, people were declared winners before the elections were even conducted in some places. Even the beneficiary of that election, 2007, actually acknowledged that the election itself was flawed. So if you look at it from that perspective, you will say, yes, and that the subsequent election, every time we improve on previous election.
You share the same view?
No, I don't. Completely not. Because if we have kept that faith, look at the quality of election as at that time. Look at the euphoria, look at the mobilization, look at the way in which the youths really came out. As I just gave you an example, if you like playing the tape right in my front now, it was almost replica of what we'll have seen on February 25th. Because a lot of people were giving a lot of hope. People travel outside the country to come in. And, you know, prior to that, we've had elections in Edo and Ondo, which have seemingly shown that there's a clear improvement in our election and then built a lot of hope. That is the reason why majority of the youth who were not even interested in our politics at that time started coming in and showing interest. But we bundled that particular hope on the 25th of February. If we had made those particular results the way it turns out to be, many of our young ones will have had more solid hope. A lot of people want to believe that, look, it was a deliberate attempt to bundle the processes of the election. Yes, there may be improvement in terms of the processes and the electoral act that was being said and all of those ones that raising the hope of the people to that particular level.
Yeah,
but it was dashed.
Okay, so perhaps that's where I'd like to just like you to shed a little more light on, because when you give that impression, yes, because when you both relieved your experience, what it was at that time, of course, you know, there are many who their experience or how they want to, at least, you mesh them in that era with your explanations. Now, when you talk about what transpired in the last elections and previously, and then you say, well, maybe not exactly all, but some areas.
Yes.
So where are those areas? What exactly is it that you think we can do to be able to at least, if not match what transpired in 1993?
Okay. In the areas of terms of advocacy and terms of the Electoral Act, we need to fine-tune it. The Nigerian people want to see where politicians can stay put in where they said they belong to. Like the issue of, cross-carpeting and all of those ones. It hurts them a lot. And then the fact that if you say ABC vote, put the result of that ABC and they are satisfied with it. When they don't see that, they believe that, okay, there's always a manipulation, that there is a power to be somewhere that decide who become who in this country.
You know, part of why I raise that is because At that time,
yes,
and both of you could respond to, I don't think we had as much electoral reforms as we have now.
Yes.
At that time.
Yes.
So what was the difference?
Good. Probably the faith in the people and then those who are handling our electoral election at that time. Maybe they still have their heads on their neck. And so they were ready to do the right thing. Okay? So, but here we have manipulation, intimidations, and all came into being. Just like what is almost happening at the National Assembly just recently now. The democracy that we know, yes, political party can decide among them and say, this is where we want you to go. But election and voting for the candidate stopped at the national anthem. But you can see what horse trading is between Yari and Akpabio. It's happening between Tajudeen and all of those ones. People are not allowed to really ventilate those people that they want them to vote. And that did not take place in that particular era.
Well, some people will say that that's the idea behind the democracy, that people will horse trade, they will canvass for votes. And it's one way of canvassing for votes. But what I would like to ask is, I mean, looking at the president's speech when he said that the abortion by military fiat of the decisive victory of Chief Moshood Kashima Olawale Abiola of the defunct Social Democratic Party in the June 12, 1993 presidential election, up to that time, that's what he said, up to that time, the freest and fairest election in the country's political evolution. Now, just that phrase, up to that time, for me, it means that there's been another election that we agree is better than that. Do you think that there's been another election since 1993 that we have reached a consensus that it was conducted better, was freer and fairer than the 1993 elections?
Well, for me, the 1993 elections was very, very fair because probably the system that was employed at the option A4.
You're sure you're not looking at it through your idealistic,
youthful lens?
No,
because I participated in it and I saw, you see, the option A4, you cannot, it's very difficult for you to manipulate.
True, it was. Very all Nigerians agree on that.
Yes.
The question is, has there been another one since 1999 that we've conducted that we can say, yeah, we've made progress in terms of the conduct of our elections,
not really,
and this one is better than what we had in 1993.
Not really. Because if we had probably the February 25th one would have been better if we have said, okay, we are going now with the jet aid of the computer and the rest of the people voted and the results are being posted real time and the result came out. Maybe it could have been better, but I think they bundled it on the presidential election. But remember, there were 3 elections that took place on that day. The Federal House of Reps, the Senate. It's only the presidential election that had glitches. The all other ones were posted at real time. And that was where they missed it. If they've allowed it, probably it could have at least scientifically uplifted what we have saw in the 8-4.
Do you understand his point, though?
Well, I do understand his point. I do understand the fact that, like the president, well, he just quoted what he was reporting in the papers that they are so losers. So I don't want to get really into that. But what I would say that after June 12, 1993 election, which was conducted by the military incidentally, one would say, well, the election also conducted in 1999 that produced Obasanjo. You say that. But you see, each time you saddle civilians with the responsibility of conducting election, because in the past we've not had this long period of uninterrupted democracy. More often than not, the military that will conduct the election normally, because in a way, their own partisanship is not apparent, unlike when civilians are conducting the election. For example, the 2003 election, which the losers at the time actually alleged, incidentally, it was conducted on April 19, and April 19 turned out to be 419 election. People derisively call that election that. So every election cycle conducted by civilians in the last 24 years will be challenged. People would say that it has not, especially those who have lost. But if you look at it, like no election, we always say, is perfect. But we say that the February 25th election approximates the will of the Nigerian people. Approximate. It's a reflection. Of course, it's work in progress. Even the Americans who have been at it 200 years plus, they still have occasional glitches. But what we're saying is that if you look at it, you say that it approximates, it reflects the wishes of the Nigerian people. This is what I would say.
That phrase being used, like saying, they are sore losers, or probably when you lose.
Just pardon us, because
okay.
we're about to go to Chief Okpadokun.
I don't think give us a little bit of history. Because those of us who are celebrated today, like the present president, was almost a sore loser because they travel out of the country. Okay. They didn't even worse than what we are doing right now.
We do have Chief Ayo Okpadokun of NADECO. He joins us virtually. Good evening, Chief, and thank you for joining us on the program today. We're just talking about reflecting what transpired in 1993 and then our experiences with what we're facing today. How can we all get this a lot better? I mean, you've seen it all. And just give us your impressions of the essence of Democracy Day, which we're celebrating today.
Fortunately, I'm not really at home with you. There's too much revisionism that is going on. Revisionism. Most of the people, characters we never knew. When the campaign for restoration of democracy was going on, are claiming what they are not. And they are the ones now dictating the tunes, making fantastic bogus statements. So I don't really want to be involved in all this diatribe. So that's my take.
Well, Chief, you know, we're just trying to see how we can, I mean, they always say that, look, you can go forward without knowing where you're coming from so that you at least get it right moving forward. And that's part of the reasons why we're looking into all of this to ensure that, I mean, tomorrow there has to be a country. We all still have to forge together no matter what transpires because we're still here after 1993. So that's why we ask you. So perhaps if you could just tell us, because I also did ask the panel here that we've had several electoral reforms ever since 1993. But we still have one challenge or the other. What, in your estimation, would you recommend and how we should approach our elections moving forward such that the spirit that we had in 1993 could resonate amongst Nigerians who vote?
The fundamental error in your position is that you are assuming that certain things were done right, so we should take them for granted, and then we start building upon nothing. You don't build something on nothing. Those who have ideas, who were there at the beginning, you have neglected them. For example, there is no basis for all that you are talking about now because you don't know even how did we arrive about June 12 itself or 1993. Something led to it. So for people like me, honestly, I don't want to engage in diatribes that are not profitable. That's the truth of the matter. So you people can go on and do your talking. Told me 6 o'clock. This is to.
Well, Chief Okpadokun, if you can hear me, it's so kind of you to join us this evening. I would really like to know, because you've talked about, you know, bogus people making bogus claims, people who were not exactly a part of the struggle for June 12. It was same trying to claim credit where they deserve none. In your mind and to your mind, who are those you think should be honored and celebrated today? Do you want to mention names? Oh dear, looks like Chief can't hear us for now. We'll work on that connection and get back to him. But since, I mean, one of the things that Chief has complained about is revisionism. He says there's plenty of it, you know, bogus people making bogus claims. And some people will say this boils down to the fact that, you know, for a while history was taken out of our curriculum. Even at some points we couldn't even agree on what history we wanted to teach. But history is back now. So the question is, what exactly are we teaching? Are we teaching history revised? Or, you know, with the plethora of everybody say your truth, you know, is truth being distorted as a result of that? What are your thoughts on it?
When, you see, people say history is a subjective account of the past, depending on who is telling the story. One African proverb says that until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, I think we're not rendering past events in a more dispassionate manner. Everybody tend to report history on the basis of their own understanding, which could be flawed more often than not. Now, and it's important that if you want to know, unless you know where you're coming from, you probably will not know where you are headed to. And I think it's important, again, for the national, if there's anything like a national curriculum, until we are all agreed. Some people say Nigeria is actually a nation work in progress. There were several countries put together. We're trying to blend into a nation. I would say yes, perhaps in a way, yes. And I think recently, the February 25th election, if we continue on that pattern, when we disregard the usual underlying forces, divisions that tend to bring the worst among us. And I think it boils down to leadership. If we have a leadership that will recognize individual, value, quality, perhaps we can go past these things that divide us and then also distort history. Because like I said, June 12, unless you are a participant or you've been there actively, depending on who is telling the story. But one thing that is agreed, yes, it was one of the freest elections conducted that saw Abiola almost coasting to victory. Well, posthumously, he actually won the election, and which is understandable. We outlined some of the reason why he won that election. So unless we go back, teach history the way it should be taught. For example, I have known growing up, some of us were compelled to understand European history, much more to the detriment of African history back in the day. Now you go back something as recently as 1980, for example. I know people when the mutant Boko Haram actually happened in Kano in 1980, when we had the Metazini. Most young people in their 30s, in their 40s, are unaware of the story of the Metazini, which was the mutant version of Boko Haram. And it actually started in Kano in 1980. So it's key, it's very important we revise our curricula, teach history the way it should be taught, the way, and then rising above the fray, a rendering that, that event of the past. It's important.
You know, Mr. Sanko, again, yes, I hear Mr. Ali, his perspective on this matter, but just talking about the process, you know, at that time and now, because people have their own versions of what transpired at that time, and you can't begrudge anyone for that. But then the thing is, the process is an all-important process. It's because no matter what transpired at that time, everybody saw the camaraderie, they saw how they were eager to participate, they saw how when they went out there to vote, you could stand behind. So that process, I think, is central to a lot of things.
Very, very important.
With the way everything turns out. To the extent that even the result at that time, to a large extent, wouldn't even matter insofar as they saw the process. So how far away are we now, then and now?
Well, it's a very, very, in fact, it's like a hand of Barbariga, they're far apart. So this particular phrase, when they say that, no, there's no perfect elections and all of those ones, it's a phrase used by those who want to feel that, okay, we've already gotten it anyway, so there's no perfect election. It's a wrong statement. If there's a particular threshold that you cannot, you have to surpass it to give a credence to an election. It's not like you having an exam. The moment you do not pass like 40, they will give you, of course, a P and a C and a B and an A. The moment you get a B, you can easily forgo of anything and say, look, this election was credible. But here we had an election that was not even surpassing the P level. Yes, because the process that you mentioned were being faulted. A lot of the process were supposed to have been followed 1, 2, 3, 4. And that, of course, comes in with the statements being made by the electoral umpire. For me, ab initio, there has been a fundamental issue. The fundamental issue actually started from the issue of Uwe's Justice Uwe's report. How I wish we implement it, it could have been better. Because we have an independent electoral commission that is heavily tilted to a particular way. Whether we like it or not, I might be the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, going by that particular position that we have in our electoral laws and selecting the INEC chairman. It is faulty. Very, very faulty. We almost have a mouthpiece of the present president being a commissioner in INEC. If not for the huge crowd by the Nigerian people, it ought not to be. That's process one. Process two would have been that, okay, how do you intend to carry out the election? At what cost? And are you sure that the people's vote will be counted? And then they can own up to it? That's another position. How do we go about going into it in case there are disputes? Believe me, Chamberlain, if we had credible elections, many of our lawyers would have been out of business. Because election would have been finished at the polling unit, and then me and him would have congratulated each other, just like you just mentioned a football match. We'll pumped each other and say, man, you tried, you did very well. But it's not so today. There's a bitter war being fought at the electoral panel.
Well, this is not the first elections being conducted since 1993. There have been several others.
True.
And the question when I asked you earlier as to whether or not there are any that we can say around, and it would seem that we all can agree that the results, were a true reflection of what transpired on election day. Are you saying that there's been none since 1999?
No, compared to what had happened in 1993, you are asking me a question whether there was anyone close to that. No, for me, no. Honestly,
well, what do you think is responsible for that?
No, it's just the execution of the agreed process.
Not even 2015 elections.
I don't. At that point in time, there were heavy use of funding and manipulation, also stealing of ballot boxes. We saw them here. We are seeing intimidation.
In 2015 elections?
They were stealing boxes.
With the introduction of the card reader?
The card reader was an introduction to just smoothing up the process. But there were both boxes. Even now, didn't you see ballot boxes being snatched? Even at the 2023? There were ballot boxes being destroyed right in front of us. You saw somebody carrying a ballot box and running.
So when I asked that question, and I said, are you sure that you're not also using the, the eyes of youth? Because sometimes, youth tends to see things in a very ideal manner. And as you rightly pointed out, in that era, there was no social media. It is what transpired in your area that you would report. That's what you'll remember. That's what will be etched in your memory. I'm sure that there must have been reports of where things did not go as perfect as you would like to remember in 1993. That didn't invalidate the general nature of the total acceptability of the elections.
Because at that particular point in time, the process was almost similarly to be accepted by everybody. In this case, it's different. You also don't forget that it was here some of us have been agitating that our youth have been docile, they are not being involved into politics. We were crying that they were not involved. People should encourage them to be part of the politics. Now they decided to be part of it. So looking at it even from their eye will have been an added plus to our democracy, seeing that we are grooming those younger ones that will take over from our leadership from tomorrow. And they're saying it has to start from now. So we need to start looking at it from the perspective of the Nigerian youth, how they feel. They feel very, very bad about the process at this particular point in time. So if there is a way in which we can appeal to their minds, making sure that probably the judiciary will have another point of view of trying to correct some of these wrongs so that they can have a little bit of trust into the process. As it is today, they are looking at it that anybody can just come in, whether you are qualified or not qualified, it doesn't matter. As long as you have your money, you can become anything.
We'll still have more elections coming through. We'll have Bayelsa, we'll have Kogi, we'll have some elections coming through. And for every election, we always want to do better than we've done before. I mean, INEC will always have that meetings and come up with several measures to see how we can improve. What, in your estimation, do you think we need to do to ensure that elections are better moving forward?
Well, I think most times we miss the point. Sometimes we focus on the process, which is important, it's crucial. But don't those who involved in the process, what about them? Politicians, the electoral empire, the people involved. Unless we have this shift in our attitude, we're still going to have a situation where the process, we go through the process, we go through the motion, but the attitude of politicians, both sides, winners and losers. Sometimes, unless we learn to see it, as not a do-or-die affair, but someday you win some, you lose some. And that's why we are celebrating today. Those who were actively involved in 1993 election and those who ran to fight for democracy, they are back. Either they are direct beneficiary of their struggle 30 years ago or they are on the other side of the divide. So unless politicians, beginning with them, one thing, if we recall very well, in the months leading to the 1993 election, there was a massive public enlightenment, the option A4, which after experimenting with others, finally settled on option A4. I remember the commendable conduct of what was then the mutant and the early version of National Orientation Agency, that is the MAMSA, a lot of public enlightenment. But you see what we have now, rather than build on that, what normally we do, sometimes you wonder where the National Orientation Agency is. We allow charlatans, people who would mount, operating from sometimes even the pulpit, turning out influences, especially for the uninitiated, people who are mindless of history, and then shaping their thought process. And then, like I said from the onset, with the social media in the mix now, young people, I've always said they are the agents of change. Young people largely participated in the election of February 25th and others before then. Now, unless we begin to have this attitudinal change, we have a country to run. We have no other country. Unless we have that, then we begin to build, if you like, new citizens, new Nigerians who, because it's a process now, those who came, into existence in 1999, they're 25-year-old now. When people make this reference, that in 1979, the likes of Osibanjo, El-Rufai, they were in their they were actually teenagers. El-Rufai in 1979 was a teenager. The current vice president in 1979, he was 13 years old. But now, when they say youth are the leaders tomorrow, how are we preparing the new Nigerians? Now, look at it. Look at our national environment now. Educationally, for example, I always say my generation, we are a product of integration. What I mean by that, we went to unity colleges, we served across the Niger, we work all over the nation. I'm from Kano, but I've lived and worked in Lagos for years. Now, I've made friends. I attended a unity college. I attended a Catholic school, for example. I lost all of my generation. Unless we begin to build new Nigerians who would see Nigeria as Nigeria. But the way we are now, if you look at the role of the pulpit in the last election, and even before then, what role, unless we begin to apply brakes, think Nigeria, maybe we'll continue to miss it. Now, in the impending election, when you have a former president saying, equating election as a do or die, that is the #1 citizen of the nation at a point that is either you win or you die in the process. That's the import of what he's saying. Unless we take away this desperation, you can serve, not necessarily, there are so many people who are influential without having to be in the executive mansion. So unless we all collectively have a rebirth, conscious, national rebirth, when we think Nigeria, and all these factors that are listed in shaping public opinion, building new Nigeria. Look at, people now want to serve in their backyard. Back in the day, you want to go away from your region. You have new experience, fresh adventure, you understand? But now people, imagine you're born in Kano, you want to serve in Katsina State. When you are sent to Akwa Ibom, you want to run back home. You are born in Akwa Ibom, I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah, so, I get you. So
the process, I guess, if we go through.
As we wind down, Mr. Tanko, when he speaks about spirit of new Nigeria, getting things right, that we talk about the process, sometimes we may be oblivious or perhaps erroneously miss out on the players themselves and the role they play. And I just wonder, I remember in 2003, that presidential election at the time, late Jennifer Wami contested that election on NCP, and you were in NCP at the time. Of course. And I think he got about 161,333 votes, and many thought, what's it meaning? Wasn't he the typology of the kind of people that we wanted to be in office at the time? Exactly. But at that time, he still didn't get the vote. He didn't go beyond that. So what is it that we missed ever since that 93 and then moving forward? Okay. That we need to get back?
Probably it's time to take a cue from the manifesto of Peter Obi that a new Nigeria is possible. You know, that's what he's talking about, getting a new Nigeria as that. And I agree. We need a new Nigeria. And then we need to, take back into some of our history and some of the things that we've done wrong. The catch here is that the present leaders, are they really interested in building a country for the future? If they are, then some of the mistakes are very, very easily we can summon them. But we ignore them. Rather, what they do is that they pile up more of those particular mistakes that's already been done over the years, as if there are no researchers.
So what do you want to see?
What I want to see is that a country that surpasses Europe, or that is in the process of surpassing...
In terms of, if there were to be reforms
laws and order,
in electoral laws.
Yes, it's law and order. Once the laws say A, follow A. If you say B, follow B. It will give us a direction. But where the laws are being positioned, and then there are manipulation of the laws, then what you are seeing is a retrogressive process. So democracy itself is about the rule of law and order. Today, you saw what is happening to former president of the United States of America, because they are trying to follow rules and laws. And if we do that to ourselves, we could have a similar view of saying that maybe our democracy will be moving. 12.5 million Nigerian youth, if I'm not quoting wrong figures, register to vote. That's to you the heavy import of the interest of this youth. And what are we sending to them? We are saying that they can just position anything that the rules and regulations says, and then you can do anything. So at the end of it all, you will not have a right to catch somebody who has stolen a chicken in the public market, because you have already kept its laws, its abeyance. But what we need to do is enforce the law, make sure it works, and then you execute it in such a way that everybody will feel comfortable about it. And I can assure you, our democracy will move in much better. But once you put it aside, believe me, we'll have a big problem.
All right, gentlemen, we have to thank you both for coming on. Dr. Yunus Atanko, Chief Spokesperson, Labour Party Presidential Campaign Council, as well as Ali, member, Presidential Transition Committee of the APC. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on, and all the best to both of you.
Thank you very much for having me.